Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. Imagine inheriting a fortune, but instead of money, it's a lifetime supply of crippling anxiety.
Oh, wow.
And like a biological predisposition to just completely self-destruct. That is the reality of generational trauma. I mean, we usually think of an inheritance as this neat transaction, right? A lawyer reading a will, handing over the keys to your future.
Yeah, a windfall.
Exactly. But when you step into the world of addiction, you're basically handed the keys to a house that is just crammed, floor to ceiling, with battered, ugly, broken furniture. It's heavy, it's useless, but you cannot refuse it.
You inherit the unresolved pain of the people who raised you. It's a staggering visual, honestly, and it forms the entire foundation of what we are unpacking today.
Yeah, so today we are doing a deep dive into this profoundly raw, totally unfiltered, and frankly, deeply reluctant memoir. The book is titled Diary of a Secret Drug Addict, and it's by an anonymous author known online just as at Secret Drug Addict.
Right.
Our mission here is to kind of strip away those polished, highlight reels of modern sobriety influencers. We want to look at the painstaking, completely unglamorous reality of rebuilding a life from the ground up.
Because it is messy.
So messy. And whether you have personal experience with addiction or, maybe you know someone who does, or you're just fascinated by human resilience, this book really shows how we inherit our coping mechanisms. And more importantly, what it actually takes to break them.
Well, and the author makes it very clear right from the prologue that this wasn't some cathartic, joyful process for him.
Not at all.
He is a highly reluctant narrator of his own life. He had to be dragged kicking and screaming into actually paying attention to his own history.
Yeah, his resistance is almost comical, but it's deeply telling. He explicitly states that he spent most of his life actively not writing a book.
Right, yeah.
He actually ended up writing this collaboratively with his wife, who, by the way, is also not a professional writer.
No, not at all.
They literally typed it out on their phones during bus rides, on the tube, on lunch breaks.
And the shape his avoidance took, it's just a masterclass in psychological deflection.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when he tried to sit down and write about his past, his brain would suddenly decide it was an absolute life or death emergency to go on eBay and hunt for early 90s Spacemen 3 t-shirts.
I think we've all been there, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Or he would convince himself that he couldn't possibly write a single word of his own story until he had read literally every autobiography ever published in the English language.
It's so relatable. If you're listening to this right now while putting off a terrifying conversation or a massive project at work, you know exactly what the author means here. It's just the brain doing everything possible to avoid a perceived threat.
Exactly. It's pure survival instinct.
But what's interesting is he already had this massive social media presence on Twitter, or X, but he draws a really sharp distinction. He says, a tweet is just a spark. It disappears into a timeline. But a book is a sustained burn.
The sustained burn, yeah.
It sits on a shelf and it waits for you.
And that waiting, it implies permanence, To write a book like this, you can't just share witty, ephemeral little fragments. You have to assemble the whole picture.
Right.
Which means forcing yourself to look at the incredibly ugly parts that you've spent decades trying to outrun.
And this challenge is something I've noticed a lot lately, actually. I mean, we treat vulnerability like it's this aspirational lifestyle choice today.
Oh, definitely.
It's curated tears on a perfectly lit Instagram reel.
Yeah.
Designed to get sympathy without ever looking truly bad. But the author describes real vulnerability as standing in a bright, unforgiving room, holding a box labeled My FK Ups.
Yeah.
And realizing you are the one who has to open it publicly.
Yeah.
So how does this book challenge our modern, kind of sanitized view of being vulnerable?
Well, that is the crucial distinction, right? Modern performative vulnerability is safe. The author is confronting the fact that real vulnerability is humiliating. It's dangerous. Opening that box means admitting you didn't just hurt yourself. You actively damaged the people who loved you. And even more terrifyingly, to understand those mistakes, you have to dissect the family blueprint you were handed. You have to figure out why you're wired to destroy things in the first place.
So let's trace that blueprint because, man, his family history is incredibly dark.
It really is.
The author demonstrates that tragic truth, hurt people. His maternal grandmother, Pat, or Helen, as he later found out was her real name, she literally walked out on her children.
Just left them?
Just left them unfed in a house in Scotland until social services finally arrived to intervene.
I mean, think about the primal wound that inflicts on a developing child's brain.
It's unthinkable.
At that age, you don't possess the cognitive ability to rationalize your mother's mental state. You don't think, oh, she's struggling. Your brain simply records the physical data I was left to starve, which means I am inherently disposable.
Wow, yeah.
That fundamental lack of worth was the emotional baseline his mother inherited.
And then you look at the other side of the family, right? His granddad, Frank, was this East End club owner who ran the Kaleidoscope Club in Soho.
Quite a character.
Yeah, spoke Cantonese, managed to avoid the heavy gangster violence, and he actually amassed a small fortune. But the author's father, who married Frank's daughter, was just deeply arrogant and incompetent.
He was.
He completely squandered that entire fortune on these failed property development schemes.
So you have a mother, desperate for love, but fundamentally broken by abandonment, tethered to a father whose unearned entitlement just curdled into this bitter, aggressive resentment.
Right.
The emotional environment of that household wasn't just cold, it was structurally volatile.
And the author gives us this heartbreaking juxtaposition to illustrate his father's emotional absence. He shares this rare, genuinely happy memory, walking with his dad to get chips, bringing them home, and watching Spider-Man together.
Just pure, simple childhood joy.
Exactly. But then he immediately contrasts it with another memory. He's 4 years old, full of that same exact joy, and he excitedly jumps onto his dad's back for a hug.
Oh, this part is tough.
It is. His dad has a bad back, and instead of a gentle correction, the father just screams at him in sheer agony and rage.
That is a perfect example of how the nervous system gets miswired by trauma.
Yeah.
The child initiates affection, and the immediate terrifying result is aggression. So the brain permanently associates happiness with physical and emotional danger.
And the author literally writes that he learned joy will hurt you.
Joy will hurt you.
Happiness becomes a threat.
Huh.
But I want to push back on this concept of the inherited broken furniture just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
I mean, the psychology makes perfect sense, but at what point do we stop seeing inherited family tragedy and start seeing an individual actively choosing to destroy their life with hard drugs?
Right, and that tension is the absolute core of the addiction debate. But the author doesn't use his trauma to absolve himself of responsibility for his later actions.
He doesn't let himself off the hook.
Not at all. But he insists on explaining the causality. Those childhood experiences installed what he calls buttons.
Buttons, right.
Deep-seated triggers for shame and just existential fear. Because he learned that connection leads to pain, he became a master of bolting.
Bolting, yeah.
Yeah.
Just running away.
The moment a relationship, a job, or a feeling got too intense, he vanished. So the trauma was inherited, but the choice to keep running, which eventually led him straight into the arms of hard drugs, that is where his individual path to addiction solidified.
And that path of isolation started incredibly early for him. By the time he was in school, his social awkwardness was so severe he couldn't even handle sharing space with other kids.
You couldn't cope.
He literally had his own locked cutlery drawer in the headmistress's office.
Yeah.
He ends up leaving school at 14, enters the music scene, and drugs just become his ultimate escape hatch.
And initially, they were highly effective. I mean, drugs offered an artificial shortcut to belonging. They numbed the constant crushing pressure of his own anxiety. They masked that terrifying feeling of just not fitting into the human race.
He describes how drugs turn the completely mundane into an adventure.
Yeah.
Like going to Tesco at 9 a.m. stoned, or just sitting there watching clothes spin in the washing machine. It felt like pure theater to him.
Right, but that artificial belonging, it requires constantly upping the dosage to keep reality at bay. And reality always breaks the door down eventually.
Always.
He finds himself stuck in this self-perpetuating loop of profound cocaine paranoia. Just isolated, watching his friends buy houses, have babies, build lives.
He was trapped on the platform while everyone else caught the train to adulthood.
That's exactly it. The illusion of escape shattered because drugs promise connection, but ultimately they deliver total isolation.
And this really culminates in the horrific Mother's Day incident. He's at a party, and a young woman tragically dies right in front of him on a balcony.
Just awful.
When I first read this part, I assumed this would be his rock bottom because he was terrified of the police or, going to jail. But the author's overriding, shameful feeling in that moment of absolute horror wasn't fear of the law, and it wasn't empathy for the girl.
No, it wasn't.
It was the desperate need for a hit to block the trauma out. He ends up calling his estranged mother and just sobs into the phone, completely unable to speak. The author says he was collecting tragedy like stamps. How does this Mother's Day incident finally shatter the illusion that his drug use was just, a harmless, laissez-faire lifestyle?
Your assessment is spot on, honestly.
Right.
It was a purely moral rock bottom. He saw himself clearly for the very first time.
Yeah.
He realized his internal compass was so deeply corrupted that he cared more about getting high than a human being dying right in front of him.
He writes that addiction doesn't show up in a cape like a villain. It sidles up, offering a shortcut to belonging, and then it just becomes a parasite. The cost of numbing his pain had finally become more excruciating than the pain itself.
And that intense moral shame left him with nowhere left to bolt. He couldn't run from himself anymore. It forced him to look for a way out, which brought him to a place he never expected to be, a room full of other recovering addicts at Narcotics Anonymous.
Right. And this is where the book completely demystifies recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, his only prior reference for getting sober was watching Sharon Gless play an alcoholic on that 80s TV show, Cagney and Lacey.
Exactly, a fictionalized, neat version.
Right. He brings a massive critique against how modern media portrays sobriety. He says they leave out all the nasty bits, the lost teeth, the bedwetting, the ulcerated legs from needle punctures.
Yeah.
He says media treats sobriety like a pot noodle that you just add water to. Like it's instant clean results.
And portraying recovery as this quick, hygienic lifestyle choice is incredibly dangerous.
How so?
Because when real recovery gets agonizingly difficult, which it does has been, people think they're doing it wrong, and so they relapse.
Oh, I see. It's like telling someone with a shattered femur that they just need to put a Band-Aid on it.
Exactly.
When they try to walk and inevitably collapse in agony, they don't blame the Band-Aid. They blame themselves for being weak. So why is the author so adamant about keeping these nasty bits of recovery visible to the public?
Keeping the filth visible removes the shame for the people currently living in it.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you are going through brutal withdrawals, wetting the bed, and your only model for sobriety is a wealthy influencer drinking a green juice, you feel completely alienated. The author needed to see the grit to know he wasn't uniquely broken.
And that gritty reality was perfectly embodied by the woman who would become his wife.
Yes, his wife.
He met her at an NA convention. She was 3 years sober at the time, having survived 10 years of daily crack use.
Wow.
And she proudly bragged about keeping all her own teeth, which is apparently a rare feat in that world.
Very rare.
But then she broke a front tooth biting into a sandwich. And instead of buying a wildly expensive implant, she bought a cheap fake tooth to frighten the kids with and used the saved money to buy a new kitchen.
Her pragmatism is just brilliant. She had zero vanity. And that radical lack of judgment became the ultimate antidote to the author's lifelong shame.
Exactly. When he tried to confess his worst deeds to her, fully expecting to be rejected, she essentially rolled her eyes and told him he wasn't that special.
Right, like, get in line.
Yeah, she's like, we're all in this room for a reason. That radical acceptance allowed him to finally stop running. It's also in these NA meetings where he has a massive psychological epiphany.
The Christmas tree lights.
Yes. He hears another addict link his drug use directly to his toxic relationships with women. Suddenly, the author realizes his own issues with drugs, avoidance, and women aren't separate problems. They're all tangled up together like a messy ball of Christmas tree lights.
Up until then, he had spent his entire life believing he could outsmart his own chemistry. He really thought if he could just calculate the perfect dosage of Valium, Coke, and weed, he could function normally.
His analogy for that is fantastic. He says trying to outwit addiction is like thinking you can outwit gravity.
You just can't do it.
But even as the author manages to find a lifeline as recovery and build a family, he is forced to watch helplessly as his own flesh and blood is swallowed whole by the exact same demons. The book takes us down two very different paths: the author's survival and the deeply tragic fate of his younger brother, Stuart.
Stuart's story is it's a devastating look at the mechanics of institutional failure.
Yeah. Stuart had a heartbreaking descent into schizophrenia, which was compounded by crack and heroin use. And the system completely failed him. They would section him for 28 days, heavily medicate him, and then just dump him back out on the street. Why does a 28-day hold fail a dual diagnosis patient so spectacularly?
Because it only addresses acute chemical stabilization. It doesn't touch psychological integration.
What do you mean?
You take a brain suffering from severe schizophrenia and drug addiction, you lock them in a ward for 4 weeks to get the street drugs out of their system, pump them full of antipsychotics until they're essentially a zombie, and then release them back into the exact same chaotic environment with absolutely zero coping mechanisms. The moment the trauma hits, they immediately self-medicate again. It's a revolving door of underfunded care.
And for Stewart, that revolving door ended in the ultimate tragedy. Deeply unwell, Stewart actually stabs his foster parents, who were caring people, trying to give him a fresh start.
Just heartbreaking all around.
He goes on the run, serves 19 years in prison, and later dies. The author describes Stewart's snowy funeral. There are only 9 people there. And the author absolutely refuses to play religious music, choosing instead to blast the New York Dolls as this fiercely loyal, angry tribute.
And that profound grief and anger over his brother's systemic abandonment, that's actually the catalyst for creating the Secret Drug Addict account.
He started it to vent about austerity cuts to mental health services. Now, the book touches on comments made by politician Sajid Javid, who argued that families, not the state, should be the primary force handling a relative's addiction due to unsustainable NHS finances. Now, I want to jump in and be crystal clear for you listening. We aren't taking a political stance here or endorsing any views on government austerity or policy, left-wing or right-wing.
Right, exactly. We're just looking at the book.
Yes. Our job is simply to convey the ideas contained in this book and report how the author perceived the dismantling of the safety net around his family. The author uses this quote to highlight a brutal reality for people like his brother. He writes, "What about the people who don't have any family?"
And he's right. Relying on a family safety net when the family itself is fractured by generational trauma is practically a death sentence. The author points out that addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer, but the safety nets available to survive it are wildly unequal.
He underscores this by mentioning a man named Colin, who lost his entire house simply through a gambling addiction that started with buying innocent scratch cards.
Scratch cards. Yeah.
Addiction does not discriminate. But what really fascinates me about his online advocacy is his insistence on remaining entirely anonymous. He refuses to show his face. We talked earlier about how using drugs takes up so much time that you live a subterranean life like a troll under a bridge.
Yeah, it becomes a full-time job.
And suddenly being sober leaves this terrifying void of free time. The account filled some of that time. But why remain anonymous? Does being faceless actually make his message more powerful to the thousands of desperate parents who are slipping into his DMs?
Actually, anonymity is his greatest tool. If he showed his face, the ego inevitably gets involved.
Oh, sure.
The media would focus on his brand, his look, his personal redemption arc. By remaining a faceless voice, he prevents himself from becoming a poster boy or some kind of guru. He becomes a mirror. When a desperate mother messages him, she isn't talking to an internet celebrity. She's talking to the pure, distilled experience of addiction and recovery.
And he actively refuses the role of savior. When people message him in a state of absolute panic, he doesn't offer grand philosophical platitudes.
No.
He asks them, have you brushed your teeth today? Did you make your bed? Have you drunk enough water? He forces them to narrow their focus of practical day-to-day actions, which perfectly sets up the end of the book where he outlines his manifesto for living.
Step 1 of that manifesto is what he calls grounds for divorce.
Yes. You have to admit that drugs are running the show like a bunch of escaped monkeys.
Escaped monkeys, I love that.
You have to divorce yourself from the illusion of control. And the reward for that divorce isn't a life of constant euphoria. It's finding peace in the mundane.
Which is hard. For an addict whose entire nervous system is calibrated to the chaos of extreme highs and lows, accepting the mundane is a massive, radical psychological adjustment.
He talks about the granular details of his current life. He allows himself exactly 2 coffees in the morning.
Because he knows any more than that will spin his anxiety out of control.
Exactly. He goes to a normal, unglamorous job. He sits and listens to his daughter's ridiculous, ever-changing career plans, and he just revels in the fact that he is present enough to hear the nonsense.
Because he isn't numb anymore.
Yeah.
And the trade-off for being present for the joy is that you also have to feel the profoundly bad moments without a chemical shield.
He writes beautifully about the grief of losing his mother while he was sober. He says going through that pain without drugs is the difference between watching a film and actually being in it. You feel every single sharp edge.
But feeling that sharp edge is the ultimate proof that you are alive and participating in your own existence.
So if you're listening to this right now, what does all of this mean for you? The author spent his whole life running from discomfort. He bolted at the first sign of pressure, numbing his generational trauma with whatever substance he could find, only to realize that the ultimate freedom isn't finding the perfect escape hatch.
No, it's not.
The ultimate freedom is knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you without needing to run away.
It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view discomfort.
Think about that inheritance we discussed at the very beginning.
Yeah.
That house full of battered, ugly, broken furniture. You don't have to pretend the furniture is beautiful.
Right.
And you don't have to set the house on fire to escape it. In a culture that is constantly selling us new ways to numb out, distract ourselves with screens, or chase the next peak experience, is the most radical thing you can do simply learning to sit quietly in the mundane, uncomfortable reality of your own life.
That is the real secret.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Diary of a Secret Drug Addict. We'll catch you next time.